One of the most, and again, confusing aspects of the cannabis business to me is trying to grapple with what many of these emerging investment and supply chain businesses actually do. For example, our next company, Vertical Companies, has as one of its mottos, everything pertaining to green.
But our logo is blue.
Yeah, that's even consistent. So that means growing, processing, distributing, investing, but it might mean licensing, purchasing, selling, designing. And it can be really hard to keep track. So I'm excited that we have Jay Smoke Wallin here, who came to the business actually despite intimations from the name, largely from the beer, wine, and spirits business. So he's going to talk about how he sees the industry growing and the role some of these new entities like Vertical Companies will have in it. And I think you've got a little something to show us.
Yeah, we'll just play a little intro reel, kind of introducing the company, and then we'll talk about it.
Just 2 hours from Las Vegas, a California company is building a cannabis campus that will have enough cultivation space for 250,000 marijuana plants to help keep up with demand in the Golden State. Patrick Walker takes us to Needles, California for an inside look at that facility.
In the small city of Needles, California, a big project is sprouting up out of the dirt on the edge of the Mojave Desert.
This is the extraction center, various forms of extraction, from ethanol to using butanes.
Drew Milburn is the chief operating officer of the Vertical Companies. The name comes from being vertically integrated, meaning they are involved in every step of marijuana production, from when it's a seed all the way to its sale as a finished product.
Once the extraction is done and you've actually pulled the product off of the flower, then it goes through various stages of distillation.
Vertical's 10,000 square foot production facility has been up and running for a few months. But they are retooling the rooms to ramp up production by as much as 500% as each of the 16 cultivation buildings come online. There's a purple glow emanating from high-intensity, energy-efficient LED lights in each of the 24 growing rooms inside of the first cultivation building, set to start growing cannabis any day now. As each building comes online, work will begin on the next one. When this entire project is built out, there will be some 640,000 square feet of cultivation space. That would make this one of, if not the largest cultivation and production facilities in the entire Southwest.
We'll have probably several hundred brands at the end of the day.
CEO Todd Kaplan says this cannabis campus will be the center of his company's operations, which has facilities in several states and in other countries.
And it depends on what the retail price and what the wholesale price of flour and oil is. But we'll probably be anywhere between $200 and $300 million worth of product coming out of just here in Needles.
While the company expects to make a big profit, the city of Needles expects to see a big windfall every year. The city's vice mayor has advocated for marijuana companies to come to Needles, and Vertical's operations are expected to pay off handsomely.
Vertical expects to employ between 500 and 550 workers once that 29-acre campus is at full operation.
Fast Money starts right now, live from the NASDAQ market site overlooking New York's Times Square. I'm Scott Wapner. Let's bring in a man who was born to work in this industry, Smoke Wallin, with Vertical Companies, a major pot player in California. It's good to have you on.
Right now, we're building our business, and we're focused on executing our plan, and we're operators, and not. There's other guys out there that are kind of buying up assets and are kind of more portfolio plays. We're an execution company. We're focused on building a scale business. I mean, this is the biggest growth opportunity of any category I can remember in my lifetime. And I'll go back to Prohibition and the repeal of the alcohol prohibition that happened in 1933. I mean, this is an industry that could be as big as the current alcohol business, which in the U.S. is $260 billion at retail sales.
Right, and so Smoke, that's what's fascinating here, because I think we tend to focus on production, and this is an awful, fire story in terms of production, but to me, this is a consumer product story. And CPG as a sector and as a way to focus investments for investors, I mean, what's happening? Who's carving out brands? Because I think brands matter in cannabis, and I actually think that people underestimate the impact in the same way that the alcohol and beverage companies are doing this, the way the cannabis companies are.
You're exactly right, and that's how we think about it. Brands are the key to everything, and we have large-scale production so that we can fulfill the needs of our brands. You know, you can't make a brand unless you can fulfill it, and you can deliver the same brand experience each time for a consumer, right? So we're building all that back-end infrastructure so that we can build brands. We have about 25 brands, some of which are ours, some of which are partner brands that we're at different stages of launching in the California market. And, you know, let's face it, brands are built in, you know, a couple places. The coast, you know, California, Southern California is as good a place as you could imagine to build brands. And then we'll take those brands, the recipes, the packaging, and license them and put them out in all the other markets that are available, which we're up to 30 states that now have some form of legal cannabis.
Appreciate you being here.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
All right, I spoke Wallin. Let's trade it, Timmy.
I agree with that guy.
So how'd you get involved in this?
Last summer, I sold my Beach Whiskey and American Harvest vodka, and my wife, sitting in the audience, turned to me and said, you know, before you do another liquor deal, can you look at cannabis?
And why'd she want you to do that?
Well, it is obviously a huge opportunity, and I knew that. I just didn't know anybody in it when that happened. So I spent about 6 months researching the business, you know, kind of networking. I leaned heavily on the YPO network, ended up at a dinner with 35 other YPOers who were either invested in or investing in cannabis, and sat next to my partner Todd Kaplan, who was in the first video, and he said, I've been investing in this thing for 4 years. I've got all these production assets. Now I want to put them together into brands and distribution. You know, I stood up and said, I'm Smoke. I'm from the alcohol business. I'm here to learn. But my whole career has been around brands and distribution, so it was a great fit.
So your whole career has been around brands and distribution. You've done a lot in liquor, a little bit in non-alc as well. What's the environment like, and how does it compare with food and beverage businesses that you've been involved with?
Well, look, I've done a lot of startups in food and beverage in particular, but the difference is, in those cases, I'm calling on customers who have been around a long time, distributors that have been around a long time, and an ecosystem that's been around a long time. So if I wanted to create a whiskey or any kind of beverage brand, you know, there's a whole ecosystem, obviously, that we can call and work with, and, you know, take a brand from idea, conception to market. And in this space, we're a startup, and we have 230 people, but we're still a startup. We're doing everything from the ground up. All of our vendors are startups for the most part. Some of the equipment guys, maybe not, but a lot of people are. All of our customers are startups. The state is a startup. The regulators don't know what they're doing yet. They're learning. You know, we like them, but they're learning on the job. They're showing up, going, "Oh, why do you guys do that?" I'm like, "Well, this is what you need to do." You know, so they're learning. The rules are changing. I don't think they published the final rules yesterday, did they, in California? We were waiting on them. I didn't see them.
I think they're closing. The draft rules are closing today, I think Cassia told me.
Yeah, so so the difference is we're doing the same things that any startup does, except the whole industry is a startup. So who do you rely on? How do you do business? You know, what do the contracts look like? And then you've got that extra layer of, you know, federal government not thinking it's okay. You know, that kind of little side.
Is trust an issue then?
Trust is always an issue.
Is it greater or less than your previous endeavors here?
Well, look, I say this in jest, but it's real. I left a meeting and I turned to my partners and I said, so those guys were making that product in their basement and they were selling $11 million a year on the black market. Those guys were criminals, right? Yeah, Smoke, you're going to deal with a lot of that. I'm like, oh, okay. So it kind of dawned on me. My whole career in the wine and spirits business, I've been dealing with the grandkids of the criminals, and now I'm dealing with the first generation guys. So trust is an issue. Yes.
Is it? I want to explore this a little bit. Is it hard to onboard people from the black market, or is it harder to onboard people who are coming to it from semi-legitimate businesses like food and beverage?
So, I say, again, I don't mean to take offense of anyone who's been in the business a long time, because I respect the hard yeoman's work that people have done. That being said, we say around the office, it's a lot easier to teach a business person the pot business than a pot person the business. There's just a whole different mentality, and so we're finding. Anyway, I'm recruiting people. I brought people from Pernod Ricard, Moet Hennessy, Anheuser-Busch, PepsiCo into my sales and marketing team, because they know how to deal with customers, they know about shelf sets, they know about brands, and they can learn the nuances of the business. And once you get outside of the flower, you're making manufactured products that are brands. And so there's always a room for flower specialists, of course, and that knowledge is helpful. And we have people there came from the legacy business, but almost all of our hires now are from CPG and normal regular businesses.
Well, so that leads to the question that we always face with legacies, with CPG entrepreneurs dealing with big company refugees. What do these folks need to learn when they come in, and what screws them up?
Well, it's in some ways the same things that when some of us were around for .com 1, and I was one of them. I built a big one, and I hired 22 people out of Diageo and all these people out of all these companies. And, a lot of those people didn't necessarily make the transition well, because once you don't have a Diageo card and you have this ex-startup card, you have to actually just, prevail on people with your reasoning and with your persuasiveness and whatever else. So big company versus startup is the same in everything, right? And so you come into this new world, and you don't have that club that you had at Anheuser-Busch or PepsiCo. You're a startup too. So that's always a transition. I always look for people that have had at least some experience in that kind of, where they've left the big company, they've had a turn trying to do something new. That's always a better thing, a better step before I bring them in.
Now, you're investing in brands, right?
We're creating our own brands, we're investing in brands, and we're partnering with existing brands.
So what kind of entrepreneurs are drawing investment in the space right now?
Well, so again, I go back to my wine and spirits distribution days, and I was in the Midwest, so we had about $1 billion company with 36,000 retailers. We did about 11 million cases of wine and spirits in our area, and we used to look, I lived in Indianapolis, and not a lot of brands started in Indy. Now, it's a great town. I raised 4 kids there. I love it. I love my Indy people. But not a lot of brands start there. They start on the coast. They start in other places. And so I would always look at what was trending, what was happening in California, what was happening in key markets. And if there was a brand that looked like it was taking off, I would go find that brand, I'd contact them, and I'd bring it to the Midwest, and I'd be the first one to get that brand in our area. And it was a great formula. It was very successful. I'm doing the same thing. So in the case that we're in California, so I think a lot of the brands of the future will come out of this market. It is the big market where you can actually have scale. And I think it's a thriving marketplace. But that being said, Colorado's been in business for longer, Washington State, Oregon, some of these places have been around a little bit longer. And so we've just gone out and looked at what's doing well in Colorado, and how, and who would we want to partner with, because it always starts with the people first. And, let's bring them to California. So we have a brand called Viola, which is Al Harrington, the NBA player's brand, and he did really well. He's got it going in Colorado. He's now in a couple other states, and we're his partner for California. We're bringing a brand called Caviar, which is owned by the Starbuds folks in Colorado, and we're bringing that to California. Saints is the #1 pre-roll in Washington State. We're bringing that to California. So we're kind of looking at what brands are showing promise, and then bringing them here. And then we're investing in new brands that we think are focused on, a certain demographic and a certain need state. I used to say, in the wine and spirits and beer space and beverage space that I come from, that a lot of you guys are in, you look around and you try to find that little white space, a little seam between all the brands that are already out there. And what would be a reason to be? Why would your brand warrant being on the shelf or at a bar? And I spent a lot of time figuring that out, and then justifying why would a distributor carry it, right? And why would a retailer carry it? Well, this industry, the whole thing's white space. I got good news for you. The whole thing is white space. There's no big brands, not a single big brand yet. Now, there's a couple guys that are showing promise, but there's no big brands yet. So it's wide open, which is, for me, I love it. I think it's exciting. I think it should be pretty exciting for a lot of people that want to jump in.
And yet the places to establish a brand are so thinly spread out, right? So, we're thick with shops here, and still, I don't know how many brands those shops can support. And as you get further out into the country, how do you get those turns without really being able to market and advertise too well?
Well, I would argue that we've got virtually all the tools to market that you'd ever want in a market like California. We can do, extensive package branding. We can do branding, in-store display branding. We can buy billboards. We can really do, there's certain social media you can't do, but you can get influencers, you can have celebrity endorsements. California
Celebrities don't look.
What's that?
Celebrities don't like marijuana.
Some do, yeah. I hear a few do. But the interesting thing is you can do all these things, and California did one thing really well that I think Colorado's missed out on so far, and another, I don't know what exactly the rules in Washington and Oregon regarding this, but there are events. You can get cannabis event licenses. It's a great part of the regulation. So you can do an event. It's a cannabis event as long as it's restricted access and you follow the rules and they're 21 and over coming in. You can have a cannabis event. So I can't think. There's not a lot of things that I would want to be able to do that I can't do here from a marketing standpoint.
Given the tools, what are some of the key issues that are affecting brand growth and what's holding them back?
Well, it starts with supply chain and being able to make product that's compliant, right? So we spent a lot of time building out infrastructure. You saw a little bit of it there. We have a 1,500-acre ranch out in Santa Barbara where we're harvesting right now 20 acres. We're preparing the ground for 100 acres of cannabis. 100 acres of cannabis at full scale with 3 seasons of growing should produce about 450,000 pounds of flower. 90% of that flour will go into oil, which will go into various brands and form factors. So you can't create a brand unless you can supply it. If I was going to launch a whiskey, I could call 10 guys today who could make my whiskey for me, and they could supply it, and we could launch it, and we could support it. You want to launch a cannabis brand right now, the problem is, can you supply it consistently? I heard, earlier the BDS presentation. Consistency, the number one criteria of any brand, I don't care what category it is, what industry it is it consistent? Is it reliable? Like when a consumer buys it the second time, is it going to be that experience that they expect? That's what a brand is. And if you can't do that, you're not a brand.
Yeah. So that's internal. What are some of the major externalities that you see affecting the growth of brands in the future?
There's a huge bottleneck in the regulatory rollout, right? Like we just talked about the rules that aren't published yet. Everyone talks about California went green, but it's followed the trajectory of alcohol, right? So when Prohibition was repealed, how many of you have actually read the 21st Amendment?
Chris?
A few of us have. It's not very extensive. All it really says is the states,
19th is repealed, right?
Yeah, the states have the right to regulate the sale and distribution of alcohol on their borders. And that led to all 50 state different rules. Well, you can still drive through Kentucky, you can drive through Texas, you can drive through other places, and you can find dry counties, right? And in a local community, they can choose to have bars or not bars. So it's all local option. Cannabis is being set up the same way. So California went legal for adult use in January. But until recently, and I don't know what the numbers are today, but the last time I checked, which was a couple of months ago, only 482 cities in the state of California, only 70 had issued any kind of permit. It's not very wet, right? It's a pretty dry state. But everyone's like, oh, everyone's getting high in California. Well, it's legal, but the cities have not approved it. You can't have a license in the state unless you have a city permit. And so, the big bottleneck right now has been supply that passes testing and is compliant with packaging, and enough licenses, enough retailers. I mean, there should be 4,000 stores in California to support this industry. And we'll get there. But last time I looked at the numbers, there were like 500 and something. So we're at a fraction of the retail space that needs to be there to support the industry. And it's projected, we think about July is when there'll be as many legal stores as there are black market stores, and that's kind of the tipping point. That's when the state starts cracking down and the business starts to be pushed into the legal market. And this is a probably a $5 to $8 billion market here.
How do brands prepare for that tipping point?
Get your supply chain in order. Make sure you pass testing. There's a lot of complaining about the testing, but I can tell you, for all of you coming in from the legitimate world, it's a good thing, right? And I've heard a lot of people out here say, "Oh, I've been buying from the same guy for 20 years." I'm like, really? Well, there's a thing called Eagle 20, this grow thing that a lot of guys use, right? And it's fine, I guess, if you ingest it, if it's on your blueberries or something. It doesn't sound very good to me, but apparently it's okay. But if you burn it, it's a carcinogen, so it's banned for cannabis. Sounds like a good idea. Really. And not having mold and salmonella and all the other things they test for, sounds like a pretty good plan. So although a lot of people are having trouble passing the testing, the tests are a good thing. And for those of you investing in the business and getting in, invest in doing it right. Invest in process. And,
so people are still trying to thread the needle on creating a clean supply chain between improving grow and creating organic crops.
I mean, you didn't want to talk about it here, but your grow in your basement that you were doing all those years.
It was an experiment. It was science. Botany.
In all seriousness, if you were growing in the black market, your main criteria was, how do I do this and not get caught, right? And most of them that got caught in LA, like a lot of them, the way they got,
I always got caught.
Yeah. Well, the way they got caught apparently was, they were illegally tapping into the power grid, right? Yeah. And which is terrible idea. Not only being a felony, it's dangerous.
Yeah, really.
And probably their basement wasn't wired for the power that they were.
I used to be 6'2".
Yeah. So all those issues are like, we're doing now industrial farming, right?
Yeah.
So you're growing 100 acres of cannabis. We're now applying the techniques that the big ag uses, but it's never been applied to this business because you had to do it in hiding. You had to do it underneath, canopy of trees or, in a little nook and cranny. You couldn't do it at scale.
But Smoke, I got to ask you about this. Like, you guys are growing, you're branding, you're investing, you're publicly traded, right?
Not yet.
But soon.
I mean, we'll see.
How should potential partners view what appears to be sort of an amorphous approach to business, as when they're surrounded by so many externalities in the industry itself?
Yeah, look, I mean, it goes back to people, right? And, our number one criteria is, can we trust the people we're dealing with, and, do your due diligence, right? I've met 50 guys that are the best grower in the world. Now, last time I checked, that can't be true, right? But that's what they say. So there's a lot of talk in this space that, you just gotta, the first guy that comes in and says, I'm the second best grower I'm gonna hire. Like, because I don't want the best grower. It's about people, and it's about relationships, and that's the same in all businesses, and it's the same here. And what's happening is there's a lot of new people coming in. They don't know the business as well, but they know how to do business. And there's a lot of people that have been in the business that are not gonna be able to make the transition very easily.
As the business matures, do you expect to see bits of what you're doing sort of get lopped off and codified a little bit?
Well, look, Gallo doesn't grow all their grapes, but they still grow grapes.
Sure.
So I would love a situation where we don't have to make all of our own product, that we've got an ecosystem that's developed, and I could contract with viable companies to produce flower for me and different steps along the way. And that'll happen for sure, like absolutely, and we're all for it. But until that happens, I know that I have real supply, that I know where it came from, I know what's in it, I know how we're getting it there, I know how it's gonna go on the shelf.
All right. Hey, thanks for sharing this company with us.